So back at it with another project on the bus. Today, I'm going to be replacing the fuel lines on my bus, or at least a few of them. I know that because of their age, I've seen that some of them are leaking fuel, and that's because they have little bitty pinholes in them. And that's also been causing an issue with losing prime whenever we shut the bus down for sometimes very short periods of time. And since I've got the air filter out, I'm just checking the turbo here to make sure that the bearings are still spinning freely and that the actual shaft on the turbo housing there is not allowing the fan blades to actually gouge into the intake housing. I recently removed the AC condenser coil from the passenger side that used to fill this space. We use a mini split to heat and cool our bus while driving, and that made accessing this area much easier so that I could get to that return line and remove all the necessary lines in this space. Now there's still a lot of residue and just oil all over everything from my most recent busted oil line that I had in the bus, and I've still been cleaning it up, but I'm going to go ahead and cut this down a little bit. That is my tachometer sending unit there, and this thing is just nasty and it's a lot of extra wire I don't need, and there is a little bit of damage to the wire. Tach has never worked. It's digital, so I don't know if they just didn't hook it up right or what, but I'd like to have a tach. I have an automatic transmission, so I don't really need a tachometer, but it's there, so it'd be nice to use it. I need to cut this back to here because I want to have some working space in this area. Additionally, I'm going to move these two power steering lines that I have in the way, and then also you can see here I had to disconnect. This is a line that goes to the air compressor on the back of the engine there. That just attached to the front filter, so it's pretty easy to get out of the way. And then you got the good old slobber tubes here, which I wish that I had this expansion metal on hand, or I would have planned to get it because it's got quite a bit of damage on the back of it and I would have liked to replace it. So as you can see here, this return fuel line's really not going to be very easy to get to, and I was only able to get a very small wrench and take maybe a 1/4 inch turn on it at a time, and that was with flipping the wrench side to side to access it at different angles. So the fuel line, it's got about, I'd say two feet of slack in it, and I don't really want to put the same length fuel line on it because it's just going to be I mean, you can see there it's hanging down quite a bit, and then it goes all the way back up to the underside of the floor to return. So it's pretty nasty. And with that being said, you might be wondering why I'm not using the access panel to get to all this. Honestly, it would be just as much work to access it from that floor panel, so I'm not going to drag all this grossness through my house. Okay, just taking a pause to show you where I'm at. Now I've got the tachometer, the sending unit here off, and as you can see, it was pretty beat up already. And in the process, you know, I don't know if I tore this off or not, but let's just say it was like that to begin with because it wasn't working. And it had quite a bit of oil residue all over it from the oil line failure that I had. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to try and rebuild this and resplice everything back into the stock plugs, and hopefully when I get it hooked back up, it'll work just fine. So I've got the high and low lines cut for the driver's air conditioning AC coil up front, and all I need to do is resolder fittings on those and then have custom lines made from the replacement auxiliary compressor I'm going to put in. And then here I've got the this line off of the air compressor, and then I've just laid the reservoir line from the power steering pump laid across the engine, got the slobber tube out, and removed this line that went from the head up to the side of the turbo. It was just really gross, covered in a lot of oil, maybe fuel possibly, who knows, but it's just a flare fitting, but any local hose or hydraulic line maker should be able to make these lines exactly how you want them. So pretty easy fix. This is just a pull out and put back on. So next I'm going to go ahead and start trying to get to that return fuel line. It is going to be the most difficult one to remove. And I'll show you how I get to that. I'll also point out that I left the power steering line, I removed it from the top there and left it hanging over the engine. There is still fluid in this, so be careful if you didn't drain your lines first. But I had to use a screwdriver to pry it off of the end because it was so stuck to the intake valve on the power steering pump. So just be careful if you don't drain the fluids, and try not to well, just try not to spill all the fluid all over your engine. Here you go. You can see where I'm at. Okay, so I'm able to come in through the side here and just get on that little bolt. You can't really see it, but I'm able to get to it through here and then come over to the top and get another little half of a half, an 1/8 inch turn on it. So there we go. You can see how nasty it is in there. Originally, I was going to leave the main fuel line from the tank to the primary filter in, and I decided against that because it would have been kind of a silly idea. And that's basically what I'm explaining here, is that I decided to go ahead and replace that line as well. Another find was the boost line up to my turbo boost gauge. There's a small fitting just off of the back of that housing there, and I don't know why, I just decided to tug on the fitting, and sure enough, there was play in it. So that's probably why my boost gauge doesn't always hold pressure. And just something else to fix, but no big deal. I'll get to it. Okay, so I went and got all the lines that I took off. So there's a new line that was on the back of the engine up there. I went ahead and got my main line to my primary filter. I went ahead and got this new little beautiful blue, but not for long, beautiful blue hose that runs from the compressor. And then I got the return line from the back of the engine, the primary line out to the first filter, and then from the first filter into the actual fuel pump housing on the front of the engine. Now, this was probably some of the best money spent on my bus yet, next to shocks. However, these fuel lines, all the fuel lines set me back close to $400, but in the end, it eliminated the prime issue I was having with my bus for over a year since I've owned it. So I've already primed the bus, and I've already fired up once, and this is about a week later, and I'm just getting ready to fire up again to make sure that it held prime. So after letting it set for a week, just a little bit of white smoke coming out. And then I just kind of look over things one more time to make sure I don't have any fluids leaking. I also want to point out that while I was cleaning everything up, I noticed a lot of residue around the fuel pump housing. I had to remove that bar for pulling the engine out of the bay. I had to remove that to get it out of the way so I could access all 3 bolts on the pump, but I was able to at least get a half a turn when retorquing each one of those bolts, so good find. And then here, after starting the bus, I'm just waiting for everything to get up to its working PSI, which is about 120. Typically, while leaving it on a high idle, after about 5 to 10 minutes of idling, the bus would start to kind of idle roughly and then eventually just die because, again, it would lose prime. My fix for this was to pressurize the fuel tank with my auxiliary air compressor, basically forcing fuel through the lines, through the fuel filters, and then back through the return line. You know, that's a quick fix, but in the end, it's probably a recipe for disaster, and I was just tired of doing it. And unfortunately, I didn't get my tachometer working either. I'm going to end up having to just replace the gear housing, so I'll be back crawling around there again. So thanks for sticking around and watching the video. If you found it useful or just liked it in general, go ahead and hit that like button. If you're an Eagle Bus enthusiast, you definitely want to subscribe. I've got more content coming your way. Until then,